Picture this. You're lying awake at 3 in the morning, and there's a voice in your head. Not the gentle, encouraging voice of a friend, but something harsher. Something that knows exactly which words will cut deepest. It whispers about your failures, magnifies your mistakes, and reminds you of every reason why you're not good enough. This voice has been with you for years, perhaps decades, and it feels like an unwelcome roommate you can never evict. But what if I told you that nearly 2,000 years ago, some of history's most resilient minds faced this exact same struggle? And they developed a philosophy that could transform your relationship with that critical inner voice forever? Ancient Stoics understood something profound about human nature that modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover. We are not helpless victims of our thoughts. We have the power to choose how we respond to the voices in our heads, including that persistent inner critic that seems determined to make us miserable. Today, we're going to explore how the timeless wisdom of Stoicism can help you have a completely different kind of conversation with your inner critic, one where you remain in control, where you can find peace, and where you can even turn that critical voice into an unlikely ally on your journey toward wisdom and resilience. The story of Stoicism begins in ancient Athens around 300 BCE. But the version that speaks most powerfully to our modern struggles with self-criticism comes from 3 remarkable figures who lived under the Roman Empire. These weren't ivory tower philosophers writing abstract theories. They were people who faced real hardships, real failures, and yes, real inner critics, yet managed to develop an unshakable inner peace that we can learn from today. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire in the world, yet his private journal, which we know today as the Meditations, reveals a man constantly battling self-doubt and harsh self-judgment. He wrote to himself about the importance of being gentle with his own mistakes while remaining committed to growth. He understood that leadership, whether of an empire or simply of your own life, requires you to be honest about your shortcomings without being destroyed by them. In one of his most revealing passages, he reminds himself that when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself that the people you deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. But then he adds something crucial. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil, just as you yourself once couldn't. The compassion he extends to others, he learned to extend to himself. Then there's Epictetus, who understood suffering in ways that few philosophers ever have. Born into slavery, physically disabled, he spent decades without control over even the most basic aspects of his life. Yet from this experience of powerlessness, he developed insights about true freedom that remain revolutionary today. Epictetus taught that we suffer not because of what happens to us, but because of our judgments about what happens to us. Your inner critic isn't tormenting you because of your actual failures or shortcomings. It's tormenting you because of the story it tells about what those failures mean. Change the story, and you change your suffering. Seneca. The third pillar of Roman Stoicism was perhaps the most relatable to our modern experience. He was wealthy, politically connected, and constantly struggling with the gap between his philosophical ideals and his human limitations. His letters to his friend Lucilius read like a conversation with someone who understands exactly what it's like to have high standards for yourself while being frustratingly, persistently human. Seneca didn't preach perfection, he preached progress. He understood that the inner critic often gains its power from our demand for immediate perfection. And he offered a different way: daily improvement, gentle persistence, and the wisdom to forgive yourself for being a work in progress. But what exactly is this inner critic that the Stoics learned to manage so skillfully? Modern psychology describes it as that internal voice that judges, criticizes, and attacks us. It's the voice that tells you you're not smart enough before a presentation. It's not attractive enough when you look in the mirror, not successful enough when you compare yourself to others. This critic often develops early in life as a protective mechanism. If I criticize myself first, maybe others won't. If I set impossibly high standards, maybe I'll achieve something worthwhile. If I punish myself for every mistake, maybe I won't make them again. The problem is that this strategy doesn't work. Research in psychology consistently shows that self-criticism doesn't motivate improvement to paralyze us. It doesn't prevent mistakes. It makes us more likely to repeat them because we're operating from a place of fear rather than wisdom. The inner critic promises to make you better, but it actually makes you smaller, more afraid. It's less willing to take the risks that growth requires. From a Stoic perspective, the inner critic represents a fundamental misunderstanding about what we can and cannot control. It's trying to control outcomes, how others perceive us, whether we succeed or fail, whether we live up to some impossible standard of perfection. But the Stoics understood that we can only control our efforts, our choices, and our responses. When your inner critic attacks you for a mistake, it's operating from the illusion that you could have controlled something that was actually beyond your control. When it berates you for not being perfect, it's demanding something that no human being has ever achieved. The Stoic approach to the inner critic isn't to silence it. Completely, that's neither possible nor wise. Instead, it's to change the nature of your conversation with it. Imagine your inner critic as a person sitting across from you. Right now, you probably relate to this voice as an authority figure whose every word you must take seriously, whose judgments are automatically true and devastating. But what if you could relate to it differently? The first step is recognizing that thoughts are not facts. When your inner critic says you always mess things up, that's not a fact about reality. It's an opinion. Opinions can be examined, questioned, and ultimately accepted or rejected. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly, examining his automatic thoughts and asking whether they were helpful, true, or necessary. He would write things like, when you are disturbed by an event, it is not the event itself that disturbs you, but only your judgment about it. Your inner critic's power comes not from the truth of what it says, but from your automatic acceptance of its judgments. This is where the Stoic discipline of perception becomes transformative. Instead of automatically believing your critical thoughts, you can step back and examine them with the curiosity of a scientist. When your inner critic says you're terrible at public speaking, you can pause and ask, is this helpful? Is this accurate? Is this based on evidence or on fear? Often you'll discover that your inner critic is operating from outdated information, catastrophic thinking, or unrealistic standards. One of the most powerful Stoic techniques for working with the inner critic is the practice of negative visualization, though it needs to be applied carefully here. Instead of imagining worst-case scenarios about your performance or worth, you can use negative visualization to put your critic's concerns in perspective. If your inner critic is terrified that you'll embarrass yourself in a meeting, spend a few minutes honestly imagining that happening. What would actually occur? You might feel uncomfortable for a while. Some people might judge you temporarily, who would learn something about preparation or speaking skills. Life would continue. The world would not end. You would still be a valuable human being worthy of love and respect. This practice doesn't make you complacent, it makes you courageous. When you realize that even your critic's worst-case scenarios are survivable, you become free to act from wisdom rather than fear. You can take appropriate preparation seriously while releasing the paralyzing anxiety about perfect performance. The Stoics also understood the importance of reframing, though they called it the discipline of judgment. When your inner critic points out a mistake you've made, instead of spiraling into shame and self-attack, you can reframe the situation. I made a mistake, and mistakes are how humans learn. This is information I can use to do better next time. Making mistakes doesn't make me a failure. It makes me someone who is brave enough to try difficult things. This isn't positive thinking or self-deception. It's accurate thinking. It's seeing the situation clearly rather than through the distorting lens of shame and self-criticism. Seneca was particularly skilled at this kind of reframing. When he made mistakes in business or politics, he would examine them carefully, extract the lessons, and then focus on moving forward with greater wisdom. He wrote about how every setback contains the seeds of growth if we're willing to look for them. Your inner critic wants to trap you in rumination about past mistakes. But Stoic reframing helps you transform those mistakes into stepping stones for future wisdom. The practice of daily reflection, which all three great Stoics maintained. Through journaling, offers another powerful way to change your relationship with your inner critic. At the end of each day, instead of allowing your critic to launch into a litany of everything you did wrong, you can take charge of the conversation. You can write about what you learned, what you're grateful for, how you grew, and what you want to focus on tomorrow. This isn't about pretending you're perfect or ignoring areas for improvement. It's about taking a balanced, compassionate view of your human experience. Marcus Aurelius' journal entries show us exactly how this works. He didn't ignore his mistakes or weaknesses, but he didn't dwell on them either. He would note them, extract practical lessons, and then refocus on his commitment to virtue and wisdom. He treated himself like a good coach treats an athlete, with high standards but also with encouragement and perspective. You can do the same. When your inner critic starts its nightly review of your failures, you can interrupt with questions that lead somewhere productive. What did I handle well today? What challenges did I navigate? What am I learning about myself? How can I approach tomorrow with greater wisdom? Self-discipline, one of the core Stoic virtues, also transforms when you stop letting your inner critic drive it. Many people think discipline requires harsh self-criticism, that you need to berate yourself into action. But the Stoics understood that true discipline comes from love of wisdom, love of growth, love of becoming the person you're capable of being. When discipline comes from self-criticism, it's fragile and unsustainable. When it comes from self-respect and vision, it's powerful and enduring. This means approaching your goals and habits from a place of care rather than criticism. Instead of "I'm so lazy, I have to force myself to exercise," you can think "I care about my health and energy, so I choose to move my body today." Instead of "I'm terrible with money, I have to stop being so irresponsible." You can think "I want to create security and freedom in my life, so I choose to be thoughtful about spending." The actions might be the same, but the internal conversation is completely different. And that difference affects everything about your experience and your long-term success. The Stoics also taught something revolutionary about failure and setbacks. They're not interruptions to your growth, they're essential parts of it. Your inner critic treats every failure as evidence that you're fundamentally flawed. But the Stoics understood that failure is simply information. It tells you where you need to develop greater skill, knowledge, or virtue when you reframe failure. This way, your inner critic loses one of its most powerful weapons. Epictetus, having experienced powerlessness so deeply, understood that our attachment to controlling outcomes is often what makes failure so painful. He taught his students to focus entirely on their effort and intention, releasing attachment to results. When you do this, your inner critic has much less material to work with. It can't berate you for things beyond your control, and it can't hold you to impossible standards of guaranteed success. This doesn't mean lowering your standards or becoming indifferent to outcomes. It means placing your standards in the right place, on your character, your effort, your growth, your response to challenges. These are things you actually can control. And when you focus your inner dialogue here, something remarkable happens. You become simultaneously more motivated and more peaceful. You work harder because you're not paralyzed by fear of failure. And you rest easier because your worth isn't dependent on external results. One of the most practical ways to implement these Stoic insights is through a technique you might call inner dialogue management. Throughout the day, notice when your inner critic starts speaking. Instead of automatically engaging with its criticisms or trying to argue with them, pause and ask, what would Marcus Aurelius say about this? How would Seneca reframe this situation? What would Epictetus remind me that I actually control here? This isn't about replacing your own voice with ancient authorities. It's about borrowing their wisdom until you develop your own inner sage. Over time, you'll find that you naturally start thinking in these more helpful, realistic, and compassionate ways. The critical voice doesn't disappear, but it becomes one voice among many. And you become the conductor who decides which voices get to lead the orchestra. Another powerful practice is what you might call critic compassion. When you notice your inner critic being particularly harsh, try to understand what it's trying to protect you from. Usually criticism comes from a place of fear of rejection, failure, embarrassment, or harm. Instead of fighting with your critic or trying to silence it, you can acknowledge its concern while choosing a wiser response. I understand you're worried that I'll be rejected if I'm not perfect, but perfectionism actually makes rejection more likely because it prevents me from being authentic and taking appropriate risks. Let me show you a better way to stay safe and grow at the same time. This approach often diffuses the critic's intensity because you're not dismissing its underlying concern. It's just offering a more effective strategy for addressing that concern. Your inner critic often becomes harsh precisely because it feels unheard or dismissed. When you listen to its fears with compassion while maintaining your own wise leadership, the volume often naturally decreases. The Stoic concept of preferred indifference also provides a helpful framework for managing the inner critic's demands. Preferred indifference are things that are naturally good to have: health, success, friendship, recognition, but that don't determine your fundamental worth or happiness. Your inner critic often creates suffering by treating these preferred indifference as absolute necessities. It tells you that you must be successful, must be loved, must be perfect, or you'll be worthless. But the Stoics understood that your worth as a human being doesn't depend on these external goods. You can prefer success while being okay with failure. You can work toward goals while maintaining your peace regardless of outcomes. You can care about others' opinions while not being controlled by them. This perspective doesn't make you indifferent or unmotivated. It makes you free to pursue what matters without the paralyzing fear that your entire identity depends on the results. The practice of morning intention setting, which Marcus Aurelius modeled in his meditations, can also help you start each day in conversation with wisdom rather than criticism. Before your inner critic has a chance to launch into its familiar litany of worries and judgments, you can set the tone by reminding yourself of what you actually control, what you're committed to, and how you want to show up in the world regardless of what happens. This might sound like, today I will focus on being kind, honest, and courageous. I will do my best work and treat others with respect. I cannot control how others respond to me or whether everything goes according to plan, but I can control my effort and my character. Whatever happens, I will look for opportunities to learn and grow. When you start the day from this place of clarity and commitment, your inner critic has less power to derail you because you've already established your priorities and identity. As you continue to practice these Stoic approaches to your inner critic, you'll likely notice something surprising. The critic doesn't just become less harsh, it becomes more helpful. When it's no longer operating from a place of fear and shame, it can actually contribute useful perspectives. It might notice genuine areas where you could improve, point out inconsistencies between your values and actions, or alert you to potential problems worth addressing. The difference is that these observations come without the emotional charge of self-attack. They're simply information you can consider and act on if appropriate. This transformation reflects one of the deepest Stoic insights. The goal isn't to eliminate difficult emotions or challenging thoughts, it's to change your relationship with them so they serve your flourishing rather than undermining it. Your inner critic, when properly managed, can become an internal advisor that helps you stay aligned with your values and committed to growth, rather than a tyrannical voice that keeps you small and afraid. The journey of transforming your relationship with your inner critic isn't quick or easy, and the Stoics would be the first to tell you that. Seneca wrote extensively about the patience required for philosophical growth, reminding his friend Lucilius that every day offers new opportunities to practice wisdom. And every day will likely include moments when you forget everything you've learned and react from old patterns of fear and self-criticism. This is normal and expected. Goal isn't perfect execution of these principles, it's consistent practice. Each time you notice your inner critic spiraling into harsh judgment and you pause to ask what you actually control, you're strengthening your philosophical muscles. Each time you reframe a mistake as a learning opportunity rather than evidence of your unworthiness, you're building resilience. Each time you treat yourself with the same compassion you'd show a good friend facing similar challenges, you're developing the inner strength that the Stoics called the citadel of the self. The beautiful thing about this work is that it ripples outward into every area of your life. When you stop being controlled by your own inner critic, you become less reactive to criticism from others. When you learn to separate your worth from your performance, you become more willing to take creative risks and pursue meaningful goals. When you develop compassion for your own struggles and imperfections, you naturally extend that same compassion to others. This is ultimately what the Stoics meant when they talked about virtue. Not perfect behavior, but the ongoing practice of wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline in the face of life's inevitable challenges. Your inner critic, properly understood and skillfully managed, becomes one of your greatest teachers in developing these virtues. Shows you where you're still attached to outcomes you can't control, where you're still demanding perfection, instead of growth, where you're still operating from fear instead of love. As we come to the end of our exploration today, remember that you don't have to wait until you've mastered these concepts to begin benefiting from them. Starting tonight, you can end your day with a few minutes of gentle reflection rather than harsh self-judgment. Tomorrow morning, you can set an intention to focus on what you control rather than worrying about what you don't. Throughout the day, you can practice pausing when your inner critic speaks and asking whether its message serves your growth or simply feeds your fears. The ancient Stoics faced the same human challenges you face today: the tendency toward self-criticism, the fear of failure, the gap between who they wanted to be and who they sometimes found themselves being. Yet they discovered that within these very challenges lay the seeds of profound strength, peace, and wisdom. They learned that you don't have to be perfect to be worthy, that you don't have to control outcomes to influence them powerfully, and that the conversation you have with yourself throughout the day is one of the most important conversations you'll ever have. Your inner critic has been speaking to you for years, perhaps decades. It's had its say, and now you know that its harsh judgments and fearful predictions are not the final word on who you are or what you're capable of. Today marks the beginning of a different kind of inner dialogue, one inspired by ancient wisdom but perfectly suited to your modern life. One where you remain in charge, where mistakes become teachers, where growth matters more than perfection, and where the voice that guides you through each day speaks from love rather than fear. The Stoics would remind you that this moment, right now, is all you truly have. You cannot change the conversations your inner critic has imposed on you in the past, and you cannot guarantee that it won't try to reassert its old patterns tomorrow. But in this moment, you can choose wisdom. You can choose compassion. You can choose to speak to yourself the way Marcus Aurelius learned to speak to himself, with honesty about areas for growth, but also with respect for the courage it takes to keep trying, keep learning, and keep becoming the person you're meant to be. The conversation starts now. Make it a good one.